Because fertility and the continuity of life was the most important fact of existence, they envisioned the spirit as female. So this was the beginning of the ancient goddess culture. One of the oldest women's symbols is the triangle, and it symbolizes the woman in her three phases of life: the virgin, begging or invoking, begging for sun and rain; the mother, when the grain is ripe, and the figure for that is the heart. And then the last phase is the crone, or the wise woman with knowledge and power. So anything that has energy rays or an upward look to it, say for example like this, that would be to symbolize that phase. What happened is when Christianity came to Eastern Europe, that culture had to be wiped out. And because women didn't want to lose their symbols, what happened is many of the designs went underground so that they wouldn't be noticed by the church. So something that began as a, and we don't have them here, but something that, one of the oldest patterns is called a cage, and the name was changed to a house blessing. And that usually was woven out of the last sheaf that was harvested, because they believed that the spirit rested in that last sheaf. So as the grain was cut, ancient people believed the spirit would move ahead of them till there was one last stand of grain left that was all cut at once in order to capture the spirit. And then that piece was like, or that sheaf was placed on a pole, and young maidens danced around that, singing praises to Shiva, goddess of the harvest. So when Christianity came, then names on the pieces were changed, and names were changed, but all the symbols remained the same. So the cage became a house blessing, and because Slovakia, or Czechoslovakia, or before that, way before that, Slovakia, was in the heart of Europe, the heart symbol was or the heart design was the symbol of Slovakia, and that originally was the third phase, or the ripe, the goddess that was ripe, and like the grain was also ripe and pregnant. So that heart pattern, when you see it, is actually evolved from that to a symbol of eternal youth and love. And then that last phase, where now actually we see Blessed Mother standing on earth with energy rays coming from her hands. So that was the wise woman with knowledge and power. So now that was transferred to Blessed Mother. Now ancient harvest crosses had equidistant arms, and there was always a sun symbol in the center. When Christianity came, that bottom arm was elongated, and there's usually a circular piece in the center. So that symbolizes Christ as the bread of life, and wheat and grain is the bread that fed the world. So when we have a heart design like this, eternal youth and love, when we have something that looks, well, this was Kathy's new design here. She's kind of got a little loop, and because, peasants were very superstitious, anything enclosed in a circle was protected. What if you were caught out on the road and at night, or it's starting to get dark and you're traveling someplace? Where do you think would be the safest place? Crossroads. Sit right in the middle so you can see somebody coming from all different directions. So, and what they did also is they drew a circle around themselves. If circles were executed counterclockwise, that doubled the power or strength of the symbol. So when you have something that has a loop in it, and then we have double loops, we have energy rays at the top, because of the combination of the symbols, that makes the design, or the pattern, or the piece itself more powerful. So many of these, like we have a little heart here, and we've got more energy to the back of it, so it's a very powerful heart. What's really interesting is when a couple was going to be promised to each other, there were no diamond rings back then. So at harvest time, if a young man presented a young woman with a loop, and inside the loop was a little love knot, and villages had different love knots, and also they used, and we know this from our Slovak folk dresses, they also use different colors to distinguish themselves, like Bastian. You know, their sleeves are always embroidered in yellow or orange. In Slovak, a lot of our Slovak folk dresses are blue. So different villages had used different colors, and they also had different love knots. So you could tell where that love token came from by the way that love knot is tied. So what was interesting, and this is what Grandma said to me one time, you know, at harvest time, you know, everybody, well, most people made, you know, little simple favors that they wore at harvest time, because that's when the weddings were, because that was when all the food was in fall. You know, there were no weddings in spring because you're running out of food. So they would exchange favors. If a young man presented a young woman with a looped love knot, with a knot in the center, and it was looped, and it had little energy rays in the back of it, because of the combination of symbols, that was the most powerful love token you can possess. If she accepted that, it was a promise of marriage. And it wasn't that year, it was the next year at harvest time, because you don't get engaged and get married right away. So so anyway, Grandma said, you know, that there was a boy in a village, and, you know, she wanted to give him one of her love knots, and she went to look, you know, to find him, and he was already wearing one. And she decided she was gonna do some detective work and find out where it came from. Because if she went to that village and she was wearing one from him, then it was hands off. So she said, unfortunately, she couldn't find the girl. She didn't know who it was or what village, but she still gave him one anyway, and he accepted it. So, you know, it was just friendship at that time, and nothing ever came of it. But, you know, there were other types of traditions, and usually, for example, at harvest time, and I'm going way back, way to the beginning of harvest mythology. You know, what happened is, you know, I told you that last sheaf was cut out all at once in order to capture the spirit, and it was usually put someplace, because people didn't understand the process of germination, they thought it was caused by a spirit, and because they believed the life force of the field was in those seeds. That was saved, and then in springtime, then that was returned to the fields, disassembled, seeds were scattered, so the life force would return to the soil, and then there would be a continuation of the growing season. Now the house blessings, and I have enough straw where I actually can make one. Those were, because of the shape, it's sort of like a little heart shape. Those, because they believed the spirit was there, those were hung on doors to keep bad out and good in. They were hung in the stalls of animals as a wish for fertility. They were hung in the eaves of barns as a protection against lightning. And because December 22nd was the eve, I believe, the eve of the winter solstice, which is the longest day of the year, sometimes they would take the seeds out of those, or out of the sheaf, and they were fed to the animals and the elderly people, so that the life force could go into them and help sustain them through the rest of the long winter. So then when Christianity came, that was renamed a house blessing. And what happened after that, because that cage design was very traditional, and that was done all over Europe. It spread everywhere, in fact. I've seen it in many, many different countries. But then what happened is a new house blessing design it began by inserting a little heart design inside the heart. So you have a double symbol, which makes it more powerful. And then when you add the little energy rays at the top, anything that has little energy rays makes it more powerful. So this weave here is called the 3-straw catfoot. So they all have certain names. 3-straw catfoot. That one's a difficult one to do because the straws are at the position of a 12, 4, and 8. 4 goes to 12, 12 goes to 4, 8 goes to 12, 12 goes to 8. And you have to keep the pressure consistent, and you have to keep the straws in exactly the same division. So that one's a tough one to do, and I can see that she really practiced this a long time, because that is probably the most perfect I've seen her do. So she must have practiced that a long time. This also, and the fact that she did this with such tiny straw, I'm really impressed. This design here is, it's an ankh. So we have the cross in the center, and the plait around the outside is called an arrow plait. So straws are divided like 2 right, 5 left, and it's kind of a different, it's a little bit of a confusing weave. And she did that pretty good. God's eye here, ancient people believe that God sees and understands the mysteries of the world through the eye in that God's eye. And many, many different countries made those. We don't know where where everything probably began. Growing of grain, they believe, began someplace around Mesopotamia and spread across the world from there. And Mesopotamia at that time, well, actually now is like present day Iran. So they believe that that's where the cultivation of grain began. Here's another, this is interesting. Okay, I've been weaving with my daughters since they were young. So this little 3-straw catfoot, my daughter is weaving this, and all of a sudden she shows me something, and there might be one in the other room. I'll have to check because I thought I saw one. Oh, here it is. And this is really interesting. So you can pass this around and look at this 3-straw catfoot. This little weave down here is actually also a 3-straw catfoot. And what she did is she says, "Mom, look at what I did." I said, "How did you do that?" She goes, "My secret." And I said, "Come on, really? No, show me. Tell me what you did." "No, it's my secret." So she showed her sister, and her sister, what this is, because it's 3 straws, held 1 straw and compressed the plait. And when you compress it, it looks really, really tight like that. So her sister took that and thought, okay, now it's all stretched out. So now I'm gonna stretch it out in the opposite direction, and you get kind of a weave that looks like this. And I said, "How'd you do that?" And she says, "It's my secret." So anyway, it took them a while before they would tell me that. So now we call that a compressed catfoot, and then we call the one where you're stretching it an expanded eccentric catfoot. So
say that first name again, compressed what?
A compressed catfoot, and when it's stretched out, it's an expanded eccentric catfoot. So our family has actually invented weaves. And what's interesting is I attended the 3rd, 4th, and 5th International Straw Festivals, and that was in Belarus, in Ukraine, in where was it after that? Oh, it was back in Belarus. And when I go over there to teach, because these women come from very, very poor villages, very poor. It's like Slovakia used to be with geese running around in the dirt streets, and what I like to do is I like to go into these villages because grain is all around them, and teach them how to make small things that they can sell in the folk art shops. Well, what's interesting is I've gone back like 2 years later, and a plat that I've taught them, they have invented actually 3 variations of that plat. So I videotaped those plats, and then I've written instructions, and then I teach master classes here in the United States for National Association of Weight Weavers. So here's something interesting. These little leaves right here, because people say, oh, do you use like a tool or anything? No, we use our fingers. But these little leaves, actually, I was doing some research, and somebody gave me a book on Swiss straw work. And this is a splint. So a straw is split into very fine splints. And then you take a dog comb and you weave on this dog comb. So the first one goes up 8, and then the second one goes 1 below on the left, 1 below on the right, then, so on, and you end up with this little leaf. So I invented 6 different variations for that, and then got those published right away, because there are a lot of people that want to take credit for your work. So I ended up publishing that, and you can see my apprentice here, she did a beautiful job with colored straw, and the little oak leaves in back of that is straw marquetry. So you would take straw and soak it and split it, scrape it, iron it, and then scrape it again, glue it to paper, and then the little oak leaves are punched out with a small like craft punch. So I was really impressed with that. This cross itself, the weave on this is a 5 straw ribbon plat. There are approximately 12 yards of that were platted to make this cross. So when you look at that, that's a tremendous amount of work to do this. This also is a 5 straw ribbon plat that has been platted. So the plat is platted, and this is called a push-pull plat. So we're getting into more advanced things now, and I told Kathy that I really think that this is absolutely gorgeous. The background on this, and it's very, very subtle. If you look at this, the background on this is all flattened straw marquetry. So there's a tremendous amount of work in that also. So that's about, I'm trying to think if there's does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Telling us about.
You said Belarus or Ukraine,
Yeah.
straw weaving straw.
Yeah.
So this kind of mythology was across all of Europe.
It was spread all over Europe.
Somehow you want those grains to produce a crop next year. And that's what drives this whole.
Okay, so, and thank you. So that's excellent analogy, excellent question. And people always say to me, how do you weave that? And the straw is actually harvested at dough stage. So a kernel in the straw is in the grain, or the head of the grain, and I'm talking about wheat and barley, and not really oats, because those you can tell right away. You don't have to actually test the kernel. But if you take the kernel out and you press it between your fingers, it's the consistency of dough. That is when the grain gets cut. And it seems like every single year it's green, and all of a sudden we get really hot weather, and within 2 days it starts to turn from green to very pale, kind of a gold color, and you absolutely have to cut then. So I was going to I can't remember, it's 3rd or 4th International Straw Festival in Petrovarad, Hungary, and the farmer in back of me, because it's all farmland in back of my home, he that year planted beardless wheat, and I love beardless wheat, and this is all beardless. These little things, the hairs coming off, are called awns, And those actually, if you try to run your finger backwards, they're like little barbs, and they will get in your clothes and stick you and poke you, and you don't wash a towel if you soaked your weed in that, because it gets in your underwear, and you're standing there at church, and all of a sudden, something's poking me. That has happened a lot of times. So anyway, so the beardless wheat was green, and I could see it was starting to turn, and I was supposed to leave for Hungary in 2 days. And I thought, oh, by the time I get back, that's gonna be too far gone, because I was gonna be gone for 8 or 9 days. So I ended up cutting 60 bundles, and it took me and my daughter like a day and a half to do that, and it happened to be like 90-some degrees. And we tied the bundles and hung them in I've got a structure in the back that's a 2-story barn. And we hung them there, and I thought, you know, it looks a little green, and I don't know what it's gonna be like when I came home. So I thought, well, you know, we'll see. But because there was so much heat, what happened is after we cut it and hung it, it's like if you take your burger off the grill, it's still gonna continue to cook a little bit because it's really hot. Well, I guess that's what happened. So it came back, and when you go to weave straw, it grows in joints, first, second, third joint, and there's a leaf shaft on every joint. So people say to me, how long did it take you to make that? I said, it takes 9 hours to clean, size, and grade 1 bundle of straw this big. 9, because you're cutting at the joint, sliding the leaf shaft off, and then you're sizing and grading all your straws, the heads, the length, and the diameter. So it came back, and I cleaned some of it, and I thought, well, I'm gonna be surprised, you know, what. It was still a little bit green near the heads, but then it got paler as we went down the shaft, and I wove the most perfect little spiral. And I'm saying, oh my gosh, this is gorgeous. And we took those to folk fair, and people were saying, how much are those little trees? Oh, they're so cute. Now, I have to tell you how I first started straw weaving. When I was about 13, my grandparents took me to Slovakia to visit relatives. Grandma and I'd like to actually print some pictures for the Historical Society, because our entire family used to dress in our Slovak folk dress, and we used to do harvest celebrations at the St. Francis Monastery in Burlington. And I have a photograph of our entire family, all in folk dress, at the monastery there for a big harvest celebration. And in front of us is this big crown, all made, and it was a traditional harvest piece, and I'd like to have a couple on display at Polish Fest this year. I'll be in the Cultural Village. So anyway, so I was doing like a hair braid, and I was doing like twisted rope hearts with Grandma. And I started when I was about 7, but when I was 13, went to Slovakia. My cousin Vlasta, who lived in Moravia, we were visiting them, and it was time for us to leave, and she came to the train station to say bye, and the train was just getting ready to start up, and she came up to the window where I was, and she handed me this spiral lantern. And I said, oh, Grandma, this is so beautiful. I wish I could make one like this, because I'd never seen straw weaving, actually spiral weaving before. And she said, oh, Sidonka, those are made to shine. Whatever you wish for, you're going to keep getting more and more of. And I go, look what happened to me. I became a straw artist. So we came back to United States, and because it was September already, and you know, all the farmers had harvested all their grains, and the only thing we had was oats that Grandma used for quite a long time, and they were pretty old. And I tried practicing with them, and I just couldn't make my spiral look like that. And I would say, Grandma, why doesn't this look good? You need to practice more. I said, I've been practicing for a long time. Well, you need to practice some more then. We went to State Fair, and we went into the agricultural building, and there on the wall, because I was a city girl, was a bouquet, and it says wheat, then it said barley, then it said oats. And I'm going, wheat, barley, oats, rye. I said, Grandma, I wonder what they wove with in Slovakia, and she goes, oh yeah, that's what they weaved with wheat. And I said, why didn't you tell me that? I've been weaving with this stupid oak for so long, and look what it looks like. And I kind of had a fit a little bit, you know, I was kind of mad at her. And the farmer that was there went over and took the bundle of wheat off the wall with the blue ribbon, and he came over and he gave it to my grandma and said, here, take this and teach your grandmother how to make what she's making out of this wheat.
Wow.
So from that, went home and I was incredulous. It was beautiful. I had practiced for so long with such soft straw that this wheat had a little spring to it. And you know, you don't want grain that is hollow, I mean, that is solid. It has to be a little bit hollow. This wheat was just perfect, and I made these beautiful spirals, and Grandma took one and mailed it to the farmer and said thank you and sent that to him. So, you know, we've been down at Holiday Folk Fair. Actually, Grandma was there for the first one, and this year is going to be 75 years. And I was just asked, International Institute just sent me a letter and said that some writer wants to interview people who have been participating in Holiday Folk Fair for a very long time. You know, can you set some time aside? And I said, yes, I can. So I'm waiting to hear, you know, when this is gonna happen. But anyway, what I wanted to tell you, so from that year on, we always had straw weavings at Folk Fair, and you know, people would come and they'd say, oh, you know, I got something when I was in Poland. And Grandma would say, really, what did it look like? And she would tell us, and Grandma would say, well, bring it in so we can see it, so maybe my granddaughter can make something like that. So it was pretty interesting. One year I had a woman from, and this is, I could tell you so many stories. I don't know how long you want me to talk.
Another couple minutes.
Okay, so anyway, so another couple minutes. So anyway, you know, this lady from Taiwan came and she had made this little element that looked really pretty, and I said, wow, that's really a pretty bead. And I'd say about 10 or 15 years ago, a Slovak lady passed away, and the family gave me some books that she had, and there in the book is how to make this bead. And I'm going, well, how did you get to Taiwan from Slovakia? That was pretty interesting. So one year, you know, somebody came to our booth and this lady said, oh, I've never seen anybody do straw weaving like this. My husband was a farmer, and we had a big bouquet of wheat on his casket, and I was been looking for someone that could make something out of that. And my grandma said, well, bring it in tomorrow. And she said, yeah, and I have something that maybe she could copy. So the lady brings it in the next day, and she said, my husband got this from a little girl about 20 years ago, and this has been his pride and joy. And we have 6 children, and they all wanted it because they knew how much it meant to him. So if you could make 6 of these out of this, I would be really happy. And she took it out of the box, and guess what?
It was yours?
It was that first spiral. It was for that farmer that gave me that first bouquet. And I made house blessings, I made love tokens, I made spirals, and she said, what do I owe you? I said, your husband paid me a long time ago. So wonderful things like that. What goes around comes around, yeah. I was doing a Smithsonian Folklife Festival in Washington DC in 1998, and this man came, and I was being interviewed by an ethnographer, and she said, you know, why do you do this? I mean, this is so time consuming. I said, well, my grandma said to me that it was up to me to pass this along, that I was the future, it was up to me to pass this along so it would never be lost. And that's what I've been doing, just trying to keep this art alive. And just as I said that, we looked over and this man was standing there, and it's hard for me to tell this story without getting a little emotional. But he was standing there and he was looking at the harvest crosses. And, you know, cause she had said, you know, you can't support yourself. No, you can't support yourself on this, you know, but anyway. So I walked over and I didn't know she followed me. And I said, can I help you? He said, you know, he said, when I was a boy, I used to sit and watch my grandma make crosses like this. And he said, I never learned. I wish I would have. But you know, he said, standing here, and he took his hanky out and wiped his eyes, and he said, I can feel her spirit. So I just like to be here for a little longer and just look at them. And I looked at the ethnographer and she went, and I did too. So little things like that, like happen all the time, no matter where I go, you know, there's always someone that has some kind of story that really touches you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Did you have a
That's impossible.